Let me say this by way of opening. I've been making the argument since our party conference that we must build a different kind of economy in the future, based on the values of the British people of responsibility, long-termism, something for something. That is a crucial long-term argument about the kind of change we need in our economy. But it's also the case that in order to create that kind of economy for the future, we've got to build a bridge to it. Now, 17 months ago, at the time of the government's emergency budget, some people agreed with Labour that David Cameron and George Osborne were cutting spending and raising taxes too far and too fast, endangering our recovery. But there were plenty of others, no doubt some in this room, who disagreed with us. Today, my appeal in particular to those who disagreed with us a year or 18 months ago is to think again and look afresh at the evidence. Having spent much of the last year travelling to every corner of Britain and listening to people, I know that many of those who disagreed with us on economic policy did so for genuine reasons. They have told me we should have done more on manufacturing, we didn't get it right on bank regulation, we should have acknowledged earlier the need for cuts. And I know these concerns were part of the reason why some people put their faith in this Conservative-led government. Some people voted Conservative, of course, at the general election for that reason. And if you like, were willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt and say, well, let's give their plan a chance to work. When the government came in, they were faced with a large deficit. People rightly felt it had to be dealt with. And they are still right to feel that. But what has changed, in my view, why the government no longer deserves the benefit of the doubt, is that even on this measure of the deficit, the central test they set themselves, their plan is not working. It isn't working, fundamentally, because their failure to get businesses growing, to see more jobs created, has locked them and the country into a vicious cycle on the deficit. With low growth, more people out of work claiming benefits, fewer paying taxes, and higher borrowing as a result. So in particular, to those that were willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt 17 months ago, I ask you to think again. And I want to convince you today of three things. First of all, that the government's plan is not working, and I'll say something about that. Secondly, that despite all the difficulties, there can be an alternative, because some people will even doubt the idea that there can be an alternative, never mind what it is. And thirdly, to say something about what that alternative is, the plan for growth and jobs that we need. In the face of flat growth, though, the government, at least for a time, pointed to a silver lining, falling unemployment, until, unfortunately, that turned too. It's now been rising since March 2011. And worse, as people well know by now, a fortnight ago we learned that we'd reached the terrible milestone for this country of 1 million young people out of work. Young people that I meet as I go round this country. Young people who are applying for hundreds of jobs and cannot find them in this economy. This failure to meet the test on jobs risks creating another lost generation. Now today we hear that Nick Clegg is trying to reintroduce Labour's Future Jobs Fund just 18 months after David Cameron scrapped it. I have to say, it's a tragedy for the young people who have faced the last 18 months without the hope for work that the Future Jobs Fund provided, and we will look at anything the government comes forward with. What will be quite wrong is them paying for it by squeezing the living standards of ordinary families further by a freeze on tax credits, which is being talked about in the papers this morning. Now, even David Cameron and George Osborne, having spent months arguing their plan had taken Britain out of the danger zone, had made us a safe haven, admit their plan is now off track, that there is a problem with growth, and that borrowing will be higher than they had hoped. The Prime Minister says, and I quote, "High levels of public and private debt are proving to be a drag on growth." He doesn't seem to understand he's got it the wrong way around. It's his failure to get the growth our economy needs that means he's missing his borrowing targets. The problem I fear with the Prime Minister is he's too out of touch to realise what that actually means in practice. Out of touch with the millions of families still in work and working hard whose living standards are being squeezed harder and harder each year. And we hear today, as I said, that the government may freeze those vital tax credits which provide vital support to hard-pressed families. Working people doing the right thing, expecting something for something, now falling victim to David Cameron's failed plan. The UK has grown even less than other badly hit economies have. Over the last 12 months, only earthquake-hit Japan has grown more slowly in the G7, and only Portugal, Greece and Cyprus have grown more slowly in the EU. So for reasons of timing, of what happened to our export performance, and of our comparative performance to other countries, we simply can't believe the government when they say it's all the fault of the Eurozone. That's why I ask those who took George Osborne's word for it last year to look again at what is really happening. Even the biggest supporter of the government will be worrying about how the evidence is piling up that their plan's not working. But there is another claim that I need to address, that we need to address, if we are to persuade people to think again. The claim that there is no alternative. Or indeed, more specifically, the claim that there can be no alternative. You hear it a lot these days, don't you? People saying, well, look, we're just in for a few bad years, maybe 5 bad years. It's one of those things. It can't be helped. It's pretty much what you hear this government saying. Things might be bad under us, but you really can't hope for anything better. So what does our economy need? Well, as many of you will know, and no doubt you will have learnt it to memory, Labour has set out a 5-point plan for growth and jobs. And as you might have guessed, I'm in favour of that because I think it will help our economy move forward. I won't recite all the 5 points to you now, but I just highlight 3 of them. Cutting VAT will get our economy moving. Levying a bank bonus tax, not cutting tax credits to help the unemployed, but levying a bank bonus tax to get the unemployed back to work, and moving forward essential capital investment. Now, it's very interesting, this debate, because some people have criticised our plan for being too small to make a difference, and saying it really won't have any effect on the real economy, and others have criticised our plan for being too expensive. To those who say it's too small, I say look at the previous VAT cut, which had a real effect in 2008, according to respected analysis. On youth unemployment, the Future Jobs Fund created 100,000 jobs and led to falling long-term youth unemployment despite a difficult labour market. In stark contrast, indeed, to the 77% rise we've seen since the abolition of that Future Jobs Fund. And advancing capital spending would have real effects, as the government's own Office for Budget Responsibility has said. To those who say, on the other hand, it's too expensive, I say not acting is more expensive economically and socially than acting. Let me end by saying why it matters so much that David Cameron changes course. I grew up in the 1980s, and I went to school with people who ended up part of that lost generation. We cannot go back to that. We cannot go back to what happened in the 1980s and indeed in the 1990s. I never believed, after the experiences of the 1980s, that any government would be coming along and saying nothing can be done. And I have to say this, the powerful in our society owe a responsibility to the powerless. It's not good enough for those in power to just shrug their shoulders and say there's nothing that can be done. Well, I'm afraid you're stuck with 5 bad years. And why is it that those people who say that are those people who are the least affected by what happens, not the most affected? It's not good enough, it's not acceptable, and it's no wonder people lose faith in the system if that's what people do.